I got a happy birthday a cappella chorus today at Mom and Them's over some fried pork chops and lima beans. So it was very good. It was very good. All right, back to business. So we'll call this meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the meeting minutes from the June 18th, 2024 meeting.
Mr. President, I call for approval of those minutes.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Sounds unanimous, so those minutes are approved. At this time, we'll have council administrators report from Cheryl Kidd.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, councilors, and all. The council administrator's report is brief. Our department budget update is the staff is still working to finalize the expenses for the 23-24 fiscal year. Discussions are continuing relative to any balances that remain in district accounts in the 23-24 budget. We are awaiting the city's reconciliation of all accounts to gain any definitive resolution on unspent balances that can be transferred. We presently do have access to New World to enter requisitions on the 24-25 budget. District's budgets being the next topic, we have begun to work simultaneously on the 24-25 budget with some limitations. We would like to discuss with each office your plans for your discretionary spending. Within the next week, Felicia Jolly will engage your office to see if there is any interest in providing the same or similar funding from the previous year to your respective schools, neighborhood associations, community partners, and district initiatives relative to your discretionary spending. We can at least begin to assist with getting all documentation in place when all restrictions are lifted in the utilization of your discretionary funds. Please be reminded of your funding obligation deadline for opera. The expenditure deadline is December 31st, 2026. Office staff concerns. On July the 1st, we were glad to welcome Nicholas G. Jackson to our department as a videographer and a PIO team member. We do hope you've had the opportunity to work with him or to acknowledge his employment here. There remains 2 unfilled positions in central staff, with one being slated for a new hire for PIO staff in the administrative area. Departmental concerns, yes. If any of you have not routinely used your fleet vehicles, please be reminded to have those serviced. As to constituent complaints, that means there may be a few. In regards to constituent complaints, we have not heard any that are coming directly to us. The 2025 Alabama legislative session. For that session, there are 26 pre-filed bills to date. If you are not aware of Senate Bill SB 3, and that bill is before you, that was filed by Senator Barfoot. This is a bill bill will authorize the Attorney General or the Governor to appoint an interim police chief for certain municipal police departments. Council travel. Yeah, I did. I told them it was before them. You do have a copy of that bill before?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, relative to travel and events and invitations to and for the council, the 3rd Economic Development Academy cohort meeting is scheduled for August 8th, and participating counselors and Mayor Wolfen should have received a calendar invitation. The Business Council of Alabama's 24 Governmental Affairs Conference is scheduled for August 9th through the 11th. That is held in Point Clear, and lodging is still available. And those who are interested in registering, please see Connie Horn. The Alabama League of Municipalities' 6th Congressional District Luncheon is scheduled for August 16th at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Vestavia Hills Civic Center. You can register for the luncheon through the Alabama League of Municipality member portal. And those of you who are certified municipal can receive CMO credits for that. Also, the Birmingham Business Alliance Luncheon is scheduled for Thursday, August the 22nd at the club, and this year's speaker is Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth. If councilors are interested in attending, please let us know as soon as possible. Seating is limited. The National League of Cities City Summit is scheduled for November the 13th through the 16th in Tampa, Florida, and registration is open at this time. As a reminder, Board of Directors and Advocacy Committee and/or our constituents group attendance at ALM and NLC conferences is required. Mr. President, that concludes my report, and I will entertain any questions or directives from the council.
You mentioned a expenditure deadline in December. Can you go back to that? And I didn't catch all of that.
On the ARPA spending?
Okay, that's what you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
ARPA? All right, gotcha. Yeah, I think the allocation deadline is in December, and
2025.
the expenditure deadline is the
Yes.
following December.
It's, okay, clarification, to
24.
obligate a project is by the end of this year. It has to be expended by 2026.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Any additional questions to Administrator Kidd?
Mr. President,
Counselor Abbott?
my only question is, has your report been sent to us?
No, I usually just give you an outline, but I can send it to you.
That would be absolutely wonderful.
All right.
I just don't write as fast as I used to.
Okay, I'll get it to everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, next up on our agenda, I just wanted to provide a brief update on proposed changes to our sign regulations that have been presented to the Planning and Zoning Committee, which I serve on with Counselor Abbott as chair. So that was presented to us last Wednesday at the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. The proposed changes really add some, definitions. There's a significant section with respect to cornice signs and how they're affixed to the building, and a lot of commensurate changes in the zoning code regarding, square footage of signage, and so on and so forth. So the Planning and Zoning Committee recommended several changes that planning staff haven't yet had the opportunity to really incorporate into the proposed regulations. So that will be coming back to Committee of the Whole if Counselor Abbott wishes them to come to Committee of the Whole at a later date. Counselor Abbott, you want to offer anything additional?
Yeah, the only thing is that we could either invite the entire council to come to the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting or have it at the Committee of the Whole if everybody wants to just package it all that way. But the sign, the thing about all our ordinances is they don't touch you personally until they do. And you don't want it to be too late. Signage, you'll have to admit it's a little dry reading. But
Right.
it's important because once the sign goes up, if it comports with the ordinance, it probably means that you voted to approve it. So we just need to, stay on top. But it will be presented back at Planning and Zoning, and then if members of the council are interested in having it come to committee of the whole, just, let us know. We don't want to take up time unnecessarily, but we want to take up time necessarily, so it just
Right.
depends on how you feel about it.
And all of, one of the things that I've learned recently is that all of the items that go through the Planning and Zoning Committee, apparently there's city code that specifies that a recommendation is required from the Planning and Zoning Committee. It's not required from Committee of the Whole, but there's definitely a requirement from the Planning and Zoning Committee. So, say that, from the sense that when we do these things in Committee of the Whole in conjunction with Planning and Zoning Committee, we have to co-advertise as a joint Committee of the Whole and Planning and Zoning Committee, so that if we take action in the Committee of the Whole meeting, we're also getting that recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Committee. That's probably more information than you wanted to hear, but anyway, trying to provide some context. So, again, just wanted to provide an update on where those proposed changes to the sign regulations are, and just anticipate that you'll be hearing more about that after planning staff has had a chance to incorporate the changes recommended by the Planning and Zoning Committee. So that brings us to item 5 on our agenda, short-term rental ordinance. And Kimberly Spurl, zoning administrator, PEP, and attorney Julie Bernard are going to be presenting.
Good afternoon and happy birthday, Council President
Thank you.
Quinn. My name is Kim Spurl. I serve as the city zoning administrator in the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. And we are here today to give you guys an update on where we are with the short-term rental regulations. Right, so first, I know there's a lot of confusion about what exactly a short-term rental is. So we wanted to clarify the definition that we're proposing to use in our regulations. So we're considering a short-term rental to be the transient use of a dwelling or any part of a dwelling for overnight occupancy of less than 30 days. So this is not going to be the apartment complexes that have a 3, 6, 9, or 12-month lease. These are going to be rentals where persons do not stay over 30 nights for occupancy. So we've talked to you guys before about why we need regulations. The number one reason is we don't have regulations specific to short-term rentals now. The only requirement that we currently have is that a short-term rental operator have a City of Birmingham business license. And I think we all agree that that is simply not enough for the number of short-term rentals that we are seeing in the City of Birmingham. So what we are proposing is to require a short-term rental permit in addition to a City of Birmingham business license. And I'll hit the highlights of what that permit will involve in just a minute. And one of the reasons we are going that route is because if we have a permit in addition to a business license, that will give us a mechanism to suspend or revoke the permit or license if we have a bad operator. And that's going to be included in the regulations as well. We also believe that these regulations will open up additional enforcement opportunities for us. We're proposing that the regulations be in the city code, and then the use and the zoning districts allowed will be in the zoning ordinance. So that will allow us additional opportunities not to make it just a zoning issue, but a city code violation will open up other enforcement opportunities for us. I just want to give you a brief outline of the engagement that we've had so far with community members. If you recall, last fall, we were able to meet with each of you one-on-one and give you an update of where we were in this process. And we also asked you for suggestions for a stakeholder engagement team. So we reached out to those individuals that you provided to us, and we have met with them on 5 occasions since December. We called them our key stakeholder group. It was a mix of neighborhood folks as well as short-term rental operators. We thought it was important to have representatives from both sides of the table so we could get feedback and input from both of them. So after we had some initial engagement meetings with them, we had 2 public input meetings in April. There was one meeting at the Crossplex, and there was another meeting at the Shields Conference Center. Both of these meetings were open to all residents of the city, anyone who was interested in short-term rentals. We gave a brief presentation at each meeting, but the majority of the time was spent literally passing the microphone around, asking the participants to give us information about what they would like to see in short-term rental regulations. We asked for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we heard all of it. We had great turnout at both meetings, and we received a lot of really good feedback from neighborhood residents as well as short-term rental operators that I think some of us may have not been able to consider before. So they're very invaluable. We also went to the CAB in May, and we provided them with an update as well on the short-term rental regulations. And then we agreed to send them a draft of the regulations when they were available. And we were able to do that about 3 weeks ago. As part of our 2 public meetings, we advertised on our website and at the meetings a survey that we asked residents and short-term rental operators to complete online for us. I won't go over all of their responses. You guys have them in your PowerPoint packet, but I did think it was important to note that 95% of our respondents actually lived in the city limits. We were unsure if it would be, more swayed one way or the other, but it was important to us to know that we were hearing from people who lived and worked in the city of Birmingham. So real quickly, I would like to go over what we have in our draft for the permit requirements. It's going to be the copy that you have before you that has City Code, Title 12, Chapter 23. This is a draft of what would be added to the city code. So some of the highlights that we receive feedback from neighbors and from the short-term rental property owners that they would like to see. Number 1 is a local responsible party. Right now, we included that they should be within a 50-mile radius of the property. We have received feedback since then that some folks would like for us to reduce that distance to somewhere between 25 and 30 miles. So that's something that we will take into consideration. We will require a site plan. We want to make sure that the property is the correct property when they're applying for their permit. As someone who works in permitting, you would be shocked at what you see sometimes when people come in for permits. So we want to make sure that we have an accurate site plan. We feel that it is going to be responsible for the short-term rental operators to have smoke detectors, to have carbon monoxide detectors, and to have fire extinguishers in their short-term rentals. And we want them to provide to us the location of where those will be. We also are requiring proof of insurance. We have spoken with our policy advocate with Airbnb. Airbnb does offer insurance for all of the short-term rental operators that are on their platform. So we did hear from some of our operators that that would not be a problem for them and that they would be willing to provide us with that information. We also would like to require a homeowners association statement for those areas that have a homeowners association. The city of Nashville has this in their short-term rental regulations. And when we talked with some of their officials, they said that it's really made a difference for them in the permitting process in some of the condominium buildings and some of the multifamily buildings that have short-term rentals. It's encouraged those owners associations to create their own short-term rental regulations. And so they're able to have their regulations in addition to the cities. And so what we would ask for is those areas that have an HOA, that the HOA president would provide a statement that the applicant does or does not meet their requirements. We also would like to require every short-term rental property owner to have a booklet at their short-term rental property. The booklet would contain all of the city codes and ordinances that apply. It would also contain a copy of an approved short-term rental permit, an approved business license for the city of Birmingham. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a short-term rental at the beach or in another vacation spot, but a lot of owners already do that. They'll put it in a cute little binder, and they might include local restaurants or entertainment venues while you're visiting. But we feel that it's very important for that information to be in the short-term rental, especially for our visitors from out of town, so that they know that there is an approved permit and an approved license for that particular short-term rental. In addition to that, we also are going to ask the short-term rental operators to post their business license and their permit on the rental platform site. So when you scroll through the pictures, when you're looking at the short-term rental online to see where the TV is, do they have a back porch? We want them to have a photograph of their approved City of Birmingham permit and business license, and that will be a requirement. We also are asking that the short-term rental operators provide us at the time of their application for a list of where they will be advertising their short-term rental, which rental platforms. We found out through this process, I don't know if you guys were aware, that there are at least 40 to 50 popular short-term rental sites. I tend to use the big ones myself. I had no idea that there were that many short-term rental platforms. So we think that it would be irresponsible if we did not ask for that information. We want to be able to track the short-term rentals. So we want to make sure that we know where they're advertising so we can have a mechanism to track them and make sure that they're following all of our rules and procedures. Some of the general requirements and restrictions that we think are important. We think that the short-term rentals, all of them must meet the city's parking requirements. As you know, the parking requirements were amended this year, but we still want to see in the site plan that they provide us how they're going to address their parking needs. We think that's important, and especially in areas of town that may have parking issues. If they have a private driveway, we want them to show us the driveway on the site plan, as well as how many vehicles can park in that driveway. We also are going to require the short-term rental adhere to our sign regulations. Councilor O'Quinn mentioned that we are revising the sign regulations. We do allow for a small sign in residential areas. It's not to advertise necessarily a short-term rental. It's more in consideration of It encompasses the political advertising signs that people put in their yards. Sometimes people put the little church signs in their yards. So as long as the short-term rental adheres to the sign regulations, then they will be okay. We do not want to see large attached signs on the sides of houses advertising short-term rentals. That's not the intent of this ordinance. One of the requirements of the ordinance will be that short-term rentals will have to retain the residential character of the neighborhood that they're in. We did have some folks with some questions. What exactly does that mean? To us, that means that if you're in a residential neighborhood, when you drive by, you should not know that there's a short-term rental at that property. That the structure should look like a house. It should look like it fits in with the neighborhood. We don't want flashing signs. We don't want anything that's going to make it stick out from anything else that's in that neighborhood. That's not the intent of short-term rentals or these regulations. We also want to ensure that our short-term rental operators adhere to the city's noise ordinance as well as the solid waste ordinance. So included in their booklets that they'll have at their homes that they are operating, we want those ordinances in the booklets so that they know and their renters know what the city's requirements are. What day is trash day? How late is too late for noise? When you need to cut it down? It's very important that this information is shared with not only the person renting it, but our short-term rental operators know what their requirements are. We also have limited the number of occupants in a short-term rental. We do not believe that the number of occupants should exceed more than 2 times the number of bedrooms plus 2. And so we used the term bedroom because I don't know if you guys have seen short-term rental listings, but some rooms may have 5 beds in them. So if you did it per bed, that would increase the occupancy. So that could go from possibly, a 5 occupant house versus 15 people. And that's not what we want to see in our short-term rentals. And I don't think our short-term rental operators, the good hosts, want to see that in their property. So that's why we chose that language. We liked that it was based off the number of bedrooms and not the actual number of beds. We also believe that short-term rentals should only be rented to one party at a time. So if you have a large house and there are multiple rooms, we don't want you renting a 10-bedroom house out to 10 individual people. That's not a short-term rental. That would be a communal living facility. So we think that it needs to be restricted to one party at a time. And we also have in our proposed regulations that you have to rent for at least 2 consecutive nights. Some of our short-term rental operators that we heard from last night at our zoning advisory committee meeting preferred that it be one night. But what we've heard from a lot of our residents is a lot of the pop-up parties, the graduation parties, my uncle rented this house for my birthday party. Those are typically one-night rentals. So we feel like the 2 consecutive night rental is going to help weed out some of those events and some of those parties that we're seeing at some of our short-term rentals. And then speaking of that, we're going to have a strict policy similar to what Airbnb has. No parties, no weddings, no concerts, no special events. These are not allowed in short-term rentals. We've spoken to a lot of our hosts, and they have strict no party policies. Some of our hosts have actually thrown people out when they have had neighbors call about parties, and that's the direction we want to go. We do not want our hosts to open up and allow baby showers, birthday parties, graduation parties, any kind of parties, concerts, special events. That's not what a short-term rental is for. So we want to make sure that we monitor that. In our opinion, that's when a property becomes an event center. And event centers are allowed in certain zoning districts by special exception, which is a review by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. They are not meant for short-term rental properties. So this is just a table to show you that we're adding short-term rental as a use in the zoning ordinance. And this is our table of permitted uses. I know it's itty-bitty, it's hard to read, but we have added short-term rentals in the zoning ordinance. The current draft, and it has the red, the words in red on the second draft. And the proposal right now is to allow short-term rentals permitted with conditions in all of the districts that allow dwelling uses. The conditions that would be required would be approval of the short-term rental permit and an approved City of Birmingham business license. I have spoken with UAB because we did not include short-term rentals in the health and institutional district, which is where UAB falls into that zoning district. And they would like for us to add short-term rentals permitted as accessory to a campus use. So that's something for us to consider as well. They do have some short-term rentals that are part of the UAB campus that they would like to consider. So the big part of these regulations is going to be if we do have someone that's not following our rules, what happens? If we have these regulations and they're adopted, we do have a proposed suspension or revocation of the permit. We've worked with Attorney Bernard and the city attorney's office on what that would look like. Yeah, if you want to hit the high points, Julie? Okay.
Okay, Julie Bernard, I serve as Assistant City Attorney in the Office of the City Attorney. And I did want to mention, kind of add on to some of what Ms. Sperl has said, in that right now, they're supposed to have business licenses. There are some issues with state law with what tax and license can share with somebody who is not part of the finance department. There are some exceptions, but having a permit allows us to have a database to know who is operating, where they are. Right now, we don't have that. If you go to most of the platforms, I know for sure for Airbnb and a lot of them, you don't know the address of the property until you get to the point of saying, yes, rent it. They protect, the privacy, the owner's information. So we can't, when we've had incidents at these, sometimes on Sunday morning, Kim and I are texting each other going, where is this? Where is this? And we're searching all over and trying to match what's in the news report to what we can see online. So that's why we thought, permits and regulations, it helps the city to know where they are and who we can hold accountable. And otherwise, we're just kind of scrambling in the dark. So that was one reason for having that. And with doing this, we're proposing to have a procedure. There were some comments last night that we'll take under consideration about the specifics of the procedure. But where we have a permit that's issued administratively, we want to have a process that that will provide due process to an owner, that the entity, planning, engineering, and permits that will be issuing these permits can suspend a permit and for a period of time. With those, we would usually have an appeal to council. If it's, and in here we've recommended, I think if it's over a certain period of time, or we had, discussed that, because, the council's the legislative body and quasi-judicial body for actions of the city. So we would want to have that. Obviously, we would try to work with a person, get them to fix things first, and then have a procedure where we could suspend the permit. Of course, there's still the reservation of the council to suspend, modify, or revoke any business license. And as you know, a lot of times when we bring businesses forward to revoke licenses, we're revoking not only the business license, but the underlying approval that the council or some other body has given to that business. So that's the intent of this section, is to have some procedures and processes that we can deal with where we have bad hosts, bad properties. So as I said, there were a few detailed comments last night that we are taking under consideration. And then if we're going to totally revoke the permit, we're also going to be revoking the business license. So there is a procedure in here, speaking to that. But if you can't have a business license without having the permit, if you revoke the permit, the business license isn't good, those will just go hand in hand. So I'm trying to think if there was anything else I thought of while you were speaking that I kind of wanted to clarify. Oh, we did mention about the noise ordinance, solid waste. We have had a conversation with Birmingham Police Department about enforcement, and that's why we wanted to put some of those references to these, other city ordinances to have the police have a reference point, within this ordinance, and we need to have some more conversations with them. The issues from the survey, the most issues we know that people complain about are issues that are already city ordinances. They're already things that are prohibited, issues with trash, issues with crowding the streets, and with too many cars. I mean, we heard people talk about, an emergency vehicle would not be able to get down their street. And so there are a lot of those, say, noise ordinance and everything, those are already city ordinances. We want to see that. And a lot of what's going to happen is going to happen at night or on weekends when general civilian staff is not on duty. So we are going to work with Birmingham Police about how can we do more, with the enforcement. And I think for them to just understand, in one of the meetings we had, I know one of the hosts, mentioned they were in one district and complained, they had a party and they called for the police to assist them in getting the people out. The police came and did it. At the other one, they were told no, it was a different precinct, different anything. So we want to get the information out and across and have understanding about enforcement procedures. So I don't know if there's anything else I need to say. Okay.
I was going to add, Julie mentioned when she was talking about the permit revocation process. As you all know, we are moving our permitting system, everything into Acela, which is our online permitting system. And we've already met with them. They do have a short-term rental permit that they can work with us on. And then we're also excited about an opportunity that they might be able to have a site that the general public could go to look up and see if a short-term rental is on their street. And if it is on their street, do they have the appropriate permits? Does it meet all the city requirements? I think that we're excited about that because it helps us with transparency issues. We want people to know that they do have an approved permit if they don't, and we want the public to help us monitor those that are being bad actors. So Julie did mention that we did have a meeting last night. Some of you guys were there. It was the Zoning Advisory Committee of the Birmingham Planning Commission. I think we were about 3 hours. I think we were there last night. We had great turnout. I think It was a number of folks who were not at some of the previous meetings, so we were able to hear some new comments. We were able to get additional feedback on concerns in some of the neighborhoods that we have not heard from yet. So what we plan to do, the zoning advisory committee voted to table the item until next month's meeting. They would like for us to go back to CAB and present the draft of the city code as well as the zoning changes to the CAB. And they would also like us to factor in some of the comments we received last night from the neighborhood officers, from neighborhood residents, and the short-term rental operators into our draft. So just to let you guys know, we will be going back to ZAC at the second meeting in August. So they did not take a vote last night. But, I'm still receiving emails even today. We received a lot of feedback, both written and verbal. So we're still taking feedback. If anyone has specific comments for the draft, we want everyone to feel like they can share their comments with us because this is an important issue and we want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. So we'll still be receiving comments through the next month as we work towards a final draft of the city code and the zoning regulations. But Julie and I are available if you guys have any questions for us about the drafts or any questions about the process and how we got here.
Thank you. So, yes, Council Woods, Councilor Abbott, myself were at the ZAC meeting last night and I feel like there was a lot of productive comments made. I feel like there's also going to be some significant changes that come as a result of that to the changes to the proposed language. I think we should all kind of take that into consideration in the context of this particular meeting. But I had a couple of things that, I wanted to comment on. One of these I mentioned last night, and this is probably like the thing that stood out to me as one of the biggest potential changes that we could make to what's been proposed in terms of the zoning portion of this, which is, as it's been presented, they would be allowed in all of the specified zoning classifications permitted with conditions. My suggestion is that we give some consideration to permitting by a special exception, which would require the neighborhood association, for the owner to go to the neighborhood association, present what they're doing and get a recommendation from the neighborhood association. You mentioned last night when I suggested that would have some implications for the zoning board of adjustments. Can you, kind of explain what kind of impact that would have for zoning board of adjustments?
Absolutely. So a special exception in the ordinance now, the applicant only has to demonstrate that their proposal will not tend to impair the health, safety, or welfare of the public. So if we were going to include short-term rentals as special exception uses in certain districts, I think we would need to strengthen that language. I think we would need to pull out some of the conditions and the requirements that are in the general code portion, or either reference that they must, in addition to meeting the health, safety, and welfare of the general public, we might want to add additional conditions that they have to meet if we need to strengthen this portion. For those of you not familiar with ZBA, there are special exception requests, there are modification requests, and there are variance requests. The toughest request to get approved is a variance because you have set standards that you have to meet in order to receive approval. So the special exception is a little bit easier to navigate through the zoning board of adjustment just because you don't have those set variance standards. So I think we would need to look at strengthening some of the conditions of approval, so it's not just a formality. Does that make sense? We don't want to say, okay, you've got a short-term rental, go to the neighborhood, go to ZBA, we know they're going to approve it anyway. We want to make sure that the neighborhood, and I feel confident the neighborhoods would, and make sure that our zoning board looks at the conditions, looks at their requirements, and make sure that they fulfill those conditions before any special exception is approved. And then, you know, we have been told that there are probably approximately 900 to 1,100 short-term rentals in Birmingham just on one platform. That doesn't account for the 40-something other platforms. So if we do move towards the special exception, that is definitely going to increase our caseload for ZBA. So I want us to make sure we consider which districts, which zoning districts we would like to have the special exception. Do we want to include them in all residential districts, just single-family residential, allow them in some of the multifamily with conditions? Those are some of the considerations as we kind of navigate through this process, what we need to consider when we talk about ZBA and special exceptions.
Great. One of the other things that came up frequently last night was concern over long-term rentals. So I wanted to ask Attorney Bernard, you know, as we're considering essentially creating a registry of short-term rental properties, you know, folks are asking, okay, why can't you do the same for long-term rental? So I wanted you to provide some context on the Alabama Landlord-Tenant Act and, you know, why long-term rentals are in a different category that the state really prohibits from the city and, you know, the county from doing some sort of registry.
Right. Well, there are a couple of things. For one thing, short-term rental is generally a transient use. For one thing, the Landlord-Tenant Act does not regulate transient uses, and generally transient uses are also not regulated by the Fair Housing Act and some of those other federal acts that apply. So when you start talking about long-term rental, you're looking at things of people's rights and their housing and things like that. There is a preemption in the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act that prohibits a municipality from having regulations or policies, ordinances that treat residential rental property differently than single-family owner-occupied homes. So I know there's been a lot of interest in having, say, you know, a registry and an inspection requirement for rental properties, and some other cities have done that. And the Alabama Supreme Court has found it's preempted by the Landlord-Tenant Act. And, you know, now if we wanted to do it, we could require an inspection of everybody's house, you know, owner-occupied, owned, you know, properties, as long as you treat them all the same way. But that's, you know, tremendous amount for the city to take on. So that's the difference. There's a prohibition in regulating it, and I have heard anecdotal, can't say the word. I've heard a story from another municipal attorney colleague outside the city of Birmingham that, his municipality adopted one of these kinds of things, and that was a reaction. The legislature, kind of like the legislature reacted to our municipal wage ordinance a number of years ago. It was like, oh no, not happening. So that preemption was put in the law.
Right, okay. Question, Councilor Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had just a follow-up on that. What's your thinking around just doing more enforcement around the business licensing piece? Because, you're required to have a business license if you're operating a long-term rental.
Right.
We can put all that on one list, but that
Yeah.
gives us some room to go out and require that, identify that. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, I was going to ask about currently there is a license that's required for renting property, and that license includes long-term rental, apartment leasing, the banquet hall rentals, and event center would have to have that license to rent the property for somebody to use it for an event. And includes storage, like mini warehousing, self-storage, those kinds of things, all wrapped up into the one business license. And that's one thing that I think we would, do for short-term rental would be to, carve out an extension to that so we know which ones of those are short-term rental licenses versus all the others. But there's ways we can carve those out to have kind of a 1, 2, and 3, the categories, so we know what they are. And so people who are, differentiate between somebody who's renting out single-family property as a long-term rental, differentiate, from somebody who's leasing banquet halls. So that's something, definitely be considered so we can see categorically what each are.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just wondering if any of the ordinances you looked at, if any of them had a distance requirement, because it strikes me that if they could just be anywhere and be too many, a lot of them in the same block could really create a lot of pressure on the neighborhood. Just any thoughts or standards or patterns, models you've seen for distance?
We did look at the ordinance from the city of Las Vegas. They have a distance requirement of 600 feet. And so we're wondering, why is it 600 feet? So I picked up the phone and gave them a call. Because I was like, where did you come up with that number? That is actually when they created their subdivisions, when they had their subdivision regulations created years ago, that was their requirement for their block length, was 600 feet.
Trying to keep it no more than.
And so they were limiting them to 1 per block. And when I talked to the director of their department, he said it's extremely difficult to enforce the distance requirement, and it's always a crazy mess at the first of every year when they start the short-term rental renewal process, because it's first come, first serve. So he said it's really problematic. If you say you can have 1 per 200 feet, if Jim gets here at 7 a.m. and lines up out front when we open at 8, and, his next door neighbor doesn't get here till 8:30, Jim wins. So he said they've had some difficulties in enforcement, and how do you choose who gets the first permit? And
Okay,
so
that
we
makes-
weren't sure if we were prepared to actually have a system to handle that yet.
Okay, I had 2 more quick questions.
I was just going to piggyback on that. The enforcement, we're also looking at this as what do we have the ability,
To regulate,
to
to really
regulate.
enforce.
And that definitely is a concern, and what rights are people, or do people have, just how do we fairly decide that issue?
Well, I had two more questions. I know you mentioned talking to the police. I want to know what they said. And then, and then I was just curious if you all knew how many HOAs we have in the city of Birmingham. I'm just curious.
On the first one, we did meet with the police. I've had another conversation, with someone that we need, we need to do another follow-up with them. I mean, primarily, they want something where they've got some standards that they can enforce and, know what to do and how to do it. We want it to be where, it's something they can write a citation for, because it's going to be the people who are staying in the house that's primarily going to cause the problems. And so that's what we've talked with them. We just need to go back over them with where we are and see what else they feel like they need, as assistant to them. But, they're like, they just need to know and how to prepare their officers to deal with it. Now, there may be, situations, we added in that the short-term rental has to comply with our solid waste ordinance. That's a complaint we heard, a good bit from people. That's one of the complaints people have. That would be one thing they, Kim mentioned having having the ordinances, but we may need to have, some guidelines that have to be put there. And the host, as you know, if you've been in an Airbnb, they usually have on the rental, they have their house rules. They might explain something like when trash has to be put out, that kind of thing. So, I've stayed in one down at the Gulf, and, if we're there on the day the trash is supposed to be picked up, we put the cart out. We put our trash in the cart, but if it's not, when we leave, it's not the day for the trash to be picked out, we don't put it to the street. And they have, cleaning staff who comes. I envision if we have the requirement that there's somebody local, we have this local agent, that's somebody that needs to be checking on the property. That person can go by and set out the trash on the day it's supposed to be set out, some things like that. So, those are some things that could be dealt with through code enforcement or other, mechanisms than just BPD. But the big complaints people have about streets crowded, noise, people going outside and shooting guns. People need to understand it is illegal to fire a firearm in the city of Birmingham, just period. So, those kinds of things are things that are policing issues, and we do want to work with them and make sure that everybody understands the bottom line. And you asked something else, you were asking? The HOAs. I don't know how many they are. We've met with some people who have short-term rentals in some of the condos downtown, and they've mentioned that they have strict rules for their condo association, and it goes beyond what we as a city can do in penalizing somebody. They can put fines on somebody who violates their regulations. I think they have like some of them are $3,000 or $5,000 that the condo association can penalize them. So.
Yeah, the Alabama Uniform Condominium Act requires them to have their condominium documents and their owners association. And all of the condominiums in Birmingham come through the city subdivision committee for approval. So anything that is a condominium where they sell units would have an HOA. And then a lot of the newer neighborhoods, probably from mid-90s to now, where they have common area that's governed by their owners association, they will have the HOA agreements. But a lot of the older, well-established neighborhoods, they may have voluntary HOAs, but not the HOAs that we know as now.
Yeah. The key is usually with an HOA or condo association, those documents are incorporated into the transfer of the property with the deeds. And so purchasing the property, you have to abide by those rules. But if they're, like I say, our older neighborhoods existed before. I've seen some old HOA documents from back 60s or earlier, but there's those, they're corporations, they can be dissolved, they're, not 100%, but what we're asking for in this document is if you have a condo association or homeowners association, you confirm to us that you're in compliance. And I think one of the recommendations last night was requiring a statement from the association rather than from the applicant, which makes sense, and we can clarify that. But the city cannot enforce those private agreements, and so that's up to the people who are part of those associations to enforce them. But we don't want to be approving a permit that we know is not in compliance with those regulations. So that's why we're asking for that confirmation.
So one of the, on that issue, I think one of the benefits of permitting by special exception would be that, we have many residents that do not have HOAs. So to me, it looks like, for those residents that do have an HOA or a condominium association, they inherently get a benefit of having an additional sort of layer of protection. So if we were permitting by special exception and requiring that, a STR operator, get the recommendation of the neighborhood association, it creates that same sort of buffer for those residents that don't have an HOA. And I think there, are other benefits too that one of the things that's not addressed in here are owner-occupied short-term rentals. And, some of what we heard last night was that there's definitely concern more on the end of the spectrum of out-of-state, ownership, and less issues with owner-occupied short-term rentals. So permitting by special exception, if it's an owner-occupied short-term rental, it's a neighbor in the neighborhood going to their own neighborhood association and, talking to fellow neighbors about what they want to do with their property. And conversely, it, makes it someone who is on the other end of the spectrum, who's, an out-of-state operator, has to exert a significant more effort to explain to residents, they've got to show up physically, and, explain to people. I mean, I feel like my neighbors, if somebody who's, regardless of the circumstances, they're going to do their due diligence to make sure that their neighborhood is protected. So, and especially in the case that someone who doesn't live in the neighborhood wants to operate a short-term rental, they're really going to scrutinize, their plans, so.
Right, and that's, you may or may not be, I know some of you are aware, but I mean, this is still an area that's developing, a lot in the law. And there was a case a couple of years ago involving City of New Orleans. And their ordinance required you to be a resident of the City of New Orleans to own a short-term rental in that city. And the Fifth Circuit found that violated the Interstate Commerce Clause because the rentals are done in interstate commerce, and so that was, discriminating against people. Now, there are later cases that are coming out that where there has, there's some differentiation in how they're regulated, if they're owner occupied. I would say even somebody who has a house that, maybe they're gonna be gone for a month and they want somebody in their house, but they're coming back to live in that house, I think that person's gonna be more careful of who is in their home. So, we have, wouldn't necessarily, I think back, I remember my sister working a job in Tennessee back when she was in college, working a summer job, and she and a couple other young women had a house. The lady was from Europe, and she went home for the summer months, and she leased out her house. It was probably more than 30 days. It wasn't particularly what we're talking about, but, it was still her house, all her things in it, and she, rented to people that she could trust that her house would be taken care of. So, there are some situations, so that is something, that we can have some additional consideration, and in considering, the special exception, what we do, and I understand, the concerns, with going with the neighborhood, we also don't want to hold everything up, there are things that we have to keep moving. So I think, as we talked about with ZBA and everything, we need to talk about how to, where we can make sense and not overburden all of our other organizations, but achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Counselor Tate?
I have a two-part question. Will the revocation process go through Public Safety Committee?
I guess some of that depends on how we deal with it. We haven't said it clearly in here. Did we say? I think we have it where it can go straight to city council. As you know, anything that goes to the council generally goes through committee, and generally, that's kind of up to the council. If it's, some of this is being dealt with planning and zoning regulations, and there's public safety regulations, so there needs to be some meeting of the mind as to which way they go, so.
And the final question, will this be a control license?
Yes, it's a regulated license. It means that, it says in here, to get a business license, you have to have the permit. And that, so that's a regulated license.
I have a sort of a technical question. So with respect to enforcement of municipal code, is it, I know some parts of our code, you have to have a law enforcement officer sort of observe the violation in order to take enforcement action. Is that the case with all of our code?
That actually comes from state law. For enforcing criminal violations, it comes from, as I kind of analogous to proving a negative, but under state law about when a police officer can arrest without a warrant. They can't, and the certain things that they're laid out, they cannot arrest for a misdemeanor that did not occur in their presence. So, is it stated exactly that way? It lists all the things that you can. A municipal ordinance violation is equivalent to a misdemeanor. So it is to arrest without a warrant, a police officer has to observe the violation. That would include, writing someone a ticket. They'd have to see it happen to write a ticket. But someone who witnessed the violation, they've got enough information to give to the magistrates for a probable cause, and they can call the police and get a report. They can go to the magistrate, and if they've got enough identifying information and everything that the magistrate can find probable cause, they can seek a warrant or a summons to municipal court for that violation. So it doesn't mean that things are not enforceable. It just means the police can't enforce on the spot unless it occurs in their presence.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So say somebody is operating a shade tree mechanic, business in on a property that's not zoned for that. A neighbor calls us, we communicate to the mayor's office, somebody within PEP checks it out. Does a law enforcement officer have to get involved at some point in order to tell that person, look, you've got to cease operations or else?
Yes, they do get involved at some point, but the way that we enforce, our code enforcement officers would go out, document the violation. They can, send a letter, says you've got to stop doing this. They have different procedures, different letters, but that's just basically, they're saying you're in violation, you got to stop the violation. And often we give a time, when it's a property issue like that, give them some time to stop, and, clean it up, whatever the circumstances are. But if they don't, then that person who's gone out from the city and has documented the violation, and sent the letter, goes to the magistrate and seeks, usually for these property-related offenses, we go through a summons rather than getting an arrest warrant, but there's a summons, and that's the point at which the law enforcement gets involved. They serve either the summons or the warrant on the person.
Right, so the reason I raised that issue is because several, of the speakers last night raised concern about enforcement and, their lack of confidence in enforcement. And if part of that concern, stems from, where we are with regard to, the number of police officers that we have currently. So, and I think generally, all of us are kind of concerned about the burden that we place on law enforcement officers in terms of, enforcing all of our code. But what I'm hearing is that we really don't have an option to do anything else, that state law requires that, law enforcement be involved at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could, what I'm thinking is like, I really wish that we could take some action that didn't require, a post-certified officer to be involved. I mean, I would love to do some things from a legislative standpoint that took some burden off of our police officers. But what I'm hearing is that state law doesn't allow us to do that.
That's correct. I mean, that's been the, conversation around the littering and all of that. That's, unless the police officer sees somebody throw that gum wrapper down on the sidewalk, they can't arrest them. But if you see them, and you know who that person is, you can go to the magistrate and say, I saw this person litter. And, give them, whoever that complaining witness is has to make an affidavit, so you're swearing to the truth of what you're telling the magistrate. And on that basis, the magistrate can issue the warrant or summons, whichever is appropriate in the situation. And then that's when law enforcement would have to serve that document on the person. So a lot of times we use the summons. It doesn't have quite the weight of a warrant, and a warrant would have to be served personally on you. A summons can be served just like you would serve a civil complaint, with the exception you can't publish it in a newspaper like you see a lot of divorce and child custody actions and things are done by publication. You can't publish, but you can serve it by mail. You can serve it to a responsible adult at the home. And the consequence if somebody doesn't appear on that summons is you just issue a warrant on them so that then the police do have to go out and find them individually and serve them with the warrant, arrest them on the warrant. So for that, whatever that charge is. So, hopefully you get people to show up on the summons. That's a little bit less intense service. But, you may be aware, the Office of City Attorney has two retired officers who have come back who are working in our office to help with the service, make sure that that a lot of this gets served for municipal court. So,
Okay.
Mr. President,
Counselor Abbott.
thank you. Our zoning ordinance, each category has uses that are allowed. In all of our residential zone districts, but particularly single-family, the zoning is for residents. And it actually spells out, it says for occupant to be occupied exclusively by one family. So how is it that we have received this request, this draft that allows these things in every single zone district we have in the city of Birmingham?
there have been court cases that have found in some context that short-term rental of residential homes is not a commercial or business use, as long as the people are only using it for residential purposes. The residential use, the sleeping, eating, brushing your teeth, all of that is what the court, there's an Alabama case to that effect. Now, it is dealing with a restricted covenant, but it's very, it's similar, kind of the difference in a covenant and like with an HOA. And a zoning ordinance is generally that it's it's who enforces it.
Okay,
And-
so a person who spends the night in my house is a resident of Birmingham, and therefore they can vote here.
No, there's the difference. Voting, you have to be domiciled, so that's a whole different conversation. Just spending the night in a place does not domicile you for the
Well, it
purposes
doesn't
of
make you a
voting.
resident either.
Well, it doesn't, but again, the use is residential. That's the question. We'll look at what you pointed out in that definition strictly and see if that is, but there is an Alabama case to that effect, and there are other jurisdictions across the country that are finding the same thing, that a short-term rental, it's not a hotel, it's not a motel, if it's one house and the people are just sleeping and eating there.
Well, our ordinance says that a single-family dwelling can be occupied exclusively by one family. Now, I realize we have a definition of a family that says three unrelated people can live in a house as a family. But transients who rent a place for the night, or maybe even 2 or 3 nights, are not families and they're not residents of the neighborhood. And I think that's one of the things that has people so up in the air. If you allow one of these things next to me, I would be infuriated because I would know what is going to happen, because I know what kind of enforcement this city has. And we don't enforce much in our city. We're incapable of enforcement. And that's what the audience last night already knew, because they've already experienced it, because these things have cropped up in all kinds of neighborhoods. I live in an E1 neighborhood. You've even put it in here. So that means the house that's for sale near me can be a short-term rental. Because even though we have covenants, I'm sure that some smart lawyer will find a way around it. But I don't believe that these should be in our residential neighborhoods. They shouldn't be in any zone district that's zoned residential. But if we were going to allow them in residential districts, they certainly shouldn't be in single family where people have bought homes with the assumption that they were living in a single family neighborhood and that they were going to have neighbors,
Yeah. And
which is
again-
not what a transient provides. He doesn't provide a good neighbor because he's gone tomorrow.
Yeah. Again, we are considering some more later case law that is coming out, that, as we discussed, about how we can differentiate and, in what we can do, and all the comments, you know, from yesterday and today are being taken into consideration.
Well, if the Supreme Court doesn't have to follow precedents anymore, I'm not sure I understand why any other court has to follow them. And I know you can't explain that one, because no one on earth can. But, you know, our neighborhoods, every other municipality surrounding us does not allow these things in their single-family neighborhoods. But we, the city of Birmingham, who put people first, we're going to let them be in every single zone district we have. Why we took PRD and HID out, let's just let them be everywhere. You know, to me, this borders on being outrageous, that we, the biggest city in the area, certainly not in Alabama, are going to let these things come and ruin our neighborhoods, which is what they're doing, especially the streets like I have, where you have 3 or 4 of them on one block face.
The council is not obligated to adopt the draft that is before them. It
Well,
is
I'm
a
certainly
draft, so
glad
you're
to
not
hear it.
obligated, and that is why we are seeking the input from this meeting. Those are drafts that are for discussion, and you're not, the council is the policymaker for the city, and you are not obligated to adopt the draft in the form that it's given to you.
Well, that is a relief. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm done for now.
Yes, so question, you mentioned earlier that, with respect to HID, you know, reaching out to UAB about, and they expressed some interest in being in one of the areas zoning districts included. I would imagine that kind of, you know, is because they have, like, you know, patients that are coming in, you know, for treatments, multiple day treatments. Yeah, so is that accurate?
Yes, sir, that's correct. And they do have a few facilities that allow that right now. And they don't have any planned for the immediate future, but they would like the option. And I would add that those properties are included in their master plan. That was part of the initial zoning. And when they do add new facilities, they come before the planning commission. So anything new would be reviewed by the planning commission, and they would have to update their master plan to change any new properties they acquire to HID zoning. So they would have a level of oversight, should they acquire more properties.
And I think, yeah, we heard last night from some of the speakers and also at the other 2 public meetings that we had, that there are host people who are coming, students who might come. I think one person mentioned having a doctor who's here for, you know, some short meeting or something at the at UAB. And some of those may be near UAB, some of them may be away, but that's some of the uses that we've heard that some people have.
Pro Tem
Yes,
Alexander?
thank you. That was one of my questions to Dr. O'Quinn, so thank you. I see why that would be the need from UAB. You think about families sometimes come in for certain procedures and they stay at Ronald McDonald House or something like that. And then I know how sometimes you can't have traveling physicians that are just coming in for one procedure or, you know, over a period of time, they want to do that. My other question was related to about the permitting and the licensing. is this gonna be annual, like a business license? What type of monitoring would be put in place for, like, we have 3 times, sort of like we do for, liquor license? How many times has someone had to come to that home and had any type of instances, or, neighbors call in? I mean, would they call 311? Would they call 911? When it's something consistent like the solid waste, not following that type of enforcement. So is that built into this, or is that being another document somewhere?
So I think it's not necessarily prescriptive in this, but those are all things that we've heard, not only from residents, but even the short-term rental owners that we've met with. They said, we would love if y'all had a designated hotline where we could call to let people know if we have problems, that the residents could call. So I think that's something that we'll have to look into for our department. But for the permit, we kind of envision this permit similar to what we do for our daycares.
Okay.
The zoning certificate of operation, where it is something, they will have to bring everything in for their initial permit, but they will be monitored throughout the year to make sure that they're in compliance with the regulations, especially if we receive complaints from neighbors, from the hosts complaining about the rental persons, or from the police department. And so there is a process where they can renew their permit annually, similar to our daycares do, but that's all subject to that checks and balances process.
Okay. And it just made me, a thought triggered within me, just knowing about the days that we pick up our trash. And so we're saying the onus is on the property owner to know what those dates are. Because, sometimes we change because of holidays and things like that. So I can see how that could become a nuisance for the neighbors that live there. And people are just putting that bag out, and maybe we don't have trash this week, we pick it up next week and something like that. So how we covering that now?
They would have to, obviously, they would have to use the uniform trash bins that the city has distributed. They can't put out bags. They would need to make that clear to their renters that you must use this cart. You can't put out bags, and there's a specific date. And then that's another reason for having somebody, either the owner, because we do have a number of people who've come and spoken who are local. So either the owner, checks on their property and makes sure the trash is put out on the right day, or they have an agent. Most of them, from talking with some of them, they clean themselves, but I think most of them have, a lot of them have cleaning agencies. So have that agency be the one to make sure the trash is put out on the proper day and that the trash can is taken back in.
Yeah, because I want to be more proactive than reactive. People start violating, and then that's when we start managing. But maybe even something in the site plan where there's evidence to us that that's been communicated or has been established as one of the requirements that they have.
Or as we, mentioned, having the binder, they could have a sheet in that, we can have the ordinance, but have a sheet that says, this is what you do with the trash, outline what you do. And again, if you've stayed, in an Airbnb, the host has rules. And in talking with a lot of the hosts that have come out and spoken, people have come out and spoken have not been the ones that have the party houses. These are people that have, taken steps to try to control these issues, and so they have strict rules. And some of the ideas that we started incorporating in the draft came from them. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
President.
One thing that was brought to my attention is that the requirement for an image of the permit in the listing may be problematic, because if they do that, anyone can do like a screen capture of that image and
Yeah.
potentially use it, as a
Yeah.
forgery. So that was a concern that I wanted to communicate.
Yeah, we've said image, but that's not what I had envisioned. I had envisioned that they have to have a place where they post their permit number, their confirmation, so it isn't as easy to do that. there are a number of jurisdictions that do require that. We've talked with Airbnb, and we know they can accommodate that. And again, you know, it was talking earlier, you know, someone earlier, I mean, I guess it was Counselor Clark, we were talking, and it's like, we say, you know, Airbnb is the biggest, as far as I know, in the country. A lot of the hosts have spoken, they are with Airbnb because a lot of the service and support. They've said Vrbo is very good, as Kim said, that we found out there are dozens of these platforms that are out there, and they are all, you know, different levels. Airbnb's kind of gotten to be the Kleenex or the Band-Aid, you know. Everybody says Airbnb when you mean short-term rental, and there are varying degrees. So what we want to do is have the standards, and if that platform can't accommodate that, then maybe the people need to be considering being on a different platform, because we want this. It also makes it easier for us to, if we're looking at a location and we see, you know, hey, these have permits, you know, we see the permit number on these, and then, and I agree, I mean, the business license posting would be problematic too, because that ties back to somebody's tax account. So probably it'll be the permit. But the, you know, as we're scanning down and then we see one doesn't have a permit, that tells us that's one we need to look at. You know, it helps our enforcement effort. You know, you prioritize those that aren't compliant. And as we mentioned, you know, talking with Acela, which is our permitting platform to put things on. We're also, you know, talking, there are some other technology, other companies that have technology solutions out there that could probably help and enhance our enforcement issues. And PEP is looking at those and evaluating, you know, what's possibilities. So hopefully we'll be able to talk with the administration and maybe bring something like that forward. And, you know, would hope we'd get some, because we have the staff, we have the resources we have. And so that's one thing we have to think about when we're doing ordinances is, what do we have the resources to deal with? And then if we want something more, how do we get the resources to do that?
So, Council Woods. Okay, Council Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few things I'll try to move expeditiously, but I think we need a definition for like what local responsible party is and what they need to have the clearance to do. I'm interested to know, one, what, if any, feedback has come back from the platforms, say Airbnb around, you know, if we notify them that somebody's not in compliance with our local ordinance, you know, is there a willingness to remove them from the platform? And then, you know, I know you mentioned 40, so I don't know what that feedback has been, if you've got any.
Well, we've had, you know, I'll tell you, we've had contact with Airbnb since about 2018 or so. I don't know if the council remembers that there was a big article about all the lodging taxes that cities were missing out on. And there was a young woman that was in Birmingham for, I think it was the Noble Conference. Her name is Viviana Jordan. And she contacted Rick Journey and said, hey, I saw this article. You know, Airbnb has a program where we will collect your lodging tax for you. And so she came and met with us. We had someone from Tax and License, Katrina Thomas, and I met with her. And we talked about a lot of the violations. And Airbnb does have a place on their platform. It's sometimes hard to find, but I do have the link that I've shared with some of you, and I'll be glad to share it, where a neighbor can report a problem directly to Airbnb. Some of the people that we've talked with have felt like they didn't get good response. I think some maybe have felt like they got response. But in that conversation that we had with Viviana Jordan, you know, she mentioned, you know, they'll take complaints from a city about you know, but she said what what Airbnb wants to see is that the city has made some effort to enforce its ordinances before. So like if it's a noise issue, you know, that we've continually tried to do something about the noise violations at this property. And then, hey, Airbnb, we can't do anything with them. And so then Airbnb will, and they can strictly, she told us a story about somebody that violated different policy, but an Airbnb policy, accidentally at one of their properties, they took him off and they took all of his other properties off. And she said she'd known him for years and he was a good host, but he made one mistake and they took him all off. Now, the thing that concerns me is then they go to another platform, a lesser platform, or they go just social media or something. But so Airbnb has that. They have also provided some information that I've passed on to the police department. They have Airbnb has a program to work with local law enforcement on safety issues. And I don't know if that's been explored, but, you know, we'll discuss that. But you know, just because we've had more contact, and it's actually, now Viviana has moved to another position, and Nia Brown, that Kim mentioned, is the current public policy director for the Southeast region for Airbnb. She's in Atlanta. She has come to meet, and she, you know, likely, you know, may come to, you know, a future council meeting or hearing.
Let me drop this in while you're right there. You know, willingness to serve as a communication medium, and so give the owner an alert that they need to renew their City of Birmingham license. Like, are those things that are possibilities to be able to
Right,
do
I mean, that's one thing for, you know, with the platform, with Acela, I think there's some permitting reminders.
Right, we've already discussed, like an automatic generated renewal notice to go out to remind these owners, you have to renew your permit. Cause we don't want them to fall through the cracks. And then I was gonna add that we've sent Nia, drafts of everything. She's been great to provide comments. Obviously, Airbnb wants to see as few restrictions as possible, because that's their business. But she's been great to provide feedback to us, and she is gonna send us a red line version of the drafts that you guys have before you, and she's gonna provide us with comments on that draft. And she's also willing to come and meet with you guys. She's offered several times. Let them know I'll be happy to come and speak if they have questions specific to Airbnb or just the short-term rental world in general. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll be able to get her here and maybe you guys can sit down and have a conversation with her.
I think the one night thing is kind of.
What you think, I was gonna say, she has provided us some feedback and some comments, and we don't take everything.
Right.
You know, we did not, you know, we talked to her about some of it earlier on, and we didn't agree with some of the suggestions. So just to let you know, we're not just going, oh, yeah, we're gonna do what you say. We're, you know, seeing how we can work, you know, with it, so.
The kind of one night restriction is kind of, because there's a lot of like justifiable things around.
You mean the currently as proposed there's a 2-night minimum? Yeah, so we heard several people
Oh,
last
yeah,
night.
well, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, not allowing you to at least for one night.
right.
You know, I think you know, I think putting all these things in place kind of help solve some of that. I think there's a bigger argument to be made around whether or not you allow them at all in residential areas than it is to kind of restrict it to forcing you to have to stay 2 nights, because there are a lot of justifiable reasons why you would want to lease it for one night. So I'm kind of interested in everything y'all receive on kind of for and against that specific point. And then lastly, the permit fee. And so in my mind, when we are establishing new regulations and ordinances that require additional kind of manpower and work to be done and tracking, because we're gonna want to, for this information to be readily available if we need to know data and things like that. And so making sure that, the fee that's being charged is gonna be commensurate with what you need to do, if we need to add things, add technology, software, manpower, contractors. I'm racking my brain around a way to outsource.
I 100%
enforcement.
agree
But-
with you on that. That's something, I'm glad you raised that point, because that's something that I also thought of, is that, especially with something new like this, we want to make sure that we're charging a fee that actually takes into consideration all of the resources that we want to have, not just in, there's always a lot of manpower, and I think, a lot of times our fees don't, really cover the actual expense of having to manage, these permitting and licensing fees and stuff. So I think that's a very excellent point. So I think currently in the code, it's set at 250.
250, yeah.
And then an annual
Yeah.
100,
Yeah.
150.
100 or 150, I don't remember what this was.
$100, no.
I think, we had, and understand, because I think somebody made a comment last night that I don't think they understood, because they were saying, things about being, based on the kind of money you take in. That's the business license. The business license is a tax, and it depends on what schedule. Some schedules are flat fees, but some, have a gross receipt so that they pay a percentage of what they make off of the business. That's the business license. And you are correct, Counselor, when we do a permit fee like this, it's an administrative fee. We've got to make sure that it's an administrative fee and not a tax. Because this is not a tax, it's a fee. We can offset the cost that you're providing a service, in relation to the police power regulation that you're doing. We want to set it at a point that it does help us cover some of the cost. So if we need another staff person just to do this, that we have some funding in place. Of course, remember that they're paying, business license, they're also paying, or should be, when a lot Airbnbs are, but everybody should be paying the lodging tax fee, the lodging tax. So we are getting income from different things. We don't want to set it so high that it's, just prohibitive to anybody wanting to do something, but, and that